So let's say that you're starting out your indie game dev journey. Well, there's a lot of engines you could choose from. I've tried a lot of these. I wanted to talk a little bit about why we ended up switching over from Game Maker Studio to Unreal. Quick disclaimer, this is real game dev talk. If you're just looking for the sort of glamorous, glorified, hey, I built GTA 6 over the weekend because Rockstar wouldn't. Well, there's plenty of that crap, clickbait crap that'll just feed the rot in your brain all over YouTube. So go ahead and click on one of those. This is going to be talking about like real game dev stuff, okay? If you're new here, you got to know that we're making the Twilight Monk Metroidvania game. This is a 2.5D handcrafted action kung fu adventure Metroidvania. With a bit more emphasis on RPG mechanics akin to something like Castlevania Symphony of the Night. This is being published by Gravity Games Arise in February of 2025, and it'll be available on Steam, which you can wishlist now, and it'll also be available on Nintendo Switch. I'm going to kick it off talking about some of the pros and cons of Game Maker Studio, and then I'll address why we switched to Unreal Engine and some of the benefits there. In fact, I'm going to start out with the biggest negatives for Game Maker Studio. If you want anything like parallax in there, then every particular object, every single sprite needs to have code in it to tell it what speed to move at in relationship to the camera. Whereas with Unreal Engine, you just simply place it in the Z depth and you build out your levels based on how you would actually see it in sort of like a shadow box 3D space. This is what we call 2.5D. Another really big negative about Game Maker Studio is the compile times. So let's say that you're adjusting code, or maybe you're trying to update some art assets. Well, every time you want to test it, and you hit the little preview button, you have to go through the entire compile process. And sometimes if you're using high resolution graphics and your game is already 400 megabytes big, your game is going to take 2 minutes to render. So let's say that you just make some changes on a sprite, or you alter some code, or you move a few things around and you want to just test that room. It has to compile the entire game, and then it has to, you run through the menus from the start to the room that you're standing in, whereas Unreal Engine just allows you to preview the room from exactly where your character is standing. And that'll literally take less than 2 seconds. You just click preview and you're looking at the room that you're in, that you just made changes to, and the code that you just made changes to. It's almost instantaneous without having to go through menus or any of that, and without having to wait 2 minutes for it to compile. That feature alone was enough for us to give up on Game Maker Studio, but however, I want to let you know, if you're doing pixel art that's low resolution, then that's not going to be a minute or a 2 minute long render. No, in fact, when I made the Aikida game, it was a 2D Meat Boy style game that I made myself, programmed it myself, did all the art myself, game design, etc. I built all of that using Game Maker Studio, and the compile times were less than 10 seconds to test anything. And it was great for that style of game because the rooms were self-contained. I didn't have to have a lot of like, you know, oh, the character has this inventory and tons of items or anything like that. That gets very complicated with something like Game Maker Studio. When you're making art for a level, for example, and you just move a few things around, you need to test to make sure the collisions are not screwy or anything like that, or enemies aren't getting stuck on geometry in your environments or collisions in your walls. And testing that requires like constant hitting the preview button, constantly previewing it. And if you got to do that literally 200 times a day, and each time it takes you a minute to a minute and a half to preview it, well, that just sinks loads and loads of time. There are workarounds for this, but I couldn't get any of those to work, and ultimately there were other reasons to change as well, but the compile times are a nightmare for Game Maker Studio, and I'll never go back to that. Game Maker Studio does not allow for any kind of real-time lighting. You can kind of fake a transparency lighting thing that gives a little bit of like just darkens a room, and then you can kind of create alphas that cut out, that make it look illuminated, but it's really all fake, and it's not particularly efficient to place lights or anything like that. You have to kind of program a custom system for that. But ultimately, when I contrast that to how easily I was able to just place lights in Unreal Engine, it was a no-brainer. When it comes to programming, I actually found Game Maker Studio was really helpful. It was like programming with training wheels, especially considering that I'm an artist. Yet you need to do this. Like if you're going to pitch games, you have to have a prototype. You can't just pitch ideas for games. Game Maker Studio uses a programming language called GML script, but it also has some object-oriented scripting. And while those systems are limited, they do really help for a non-programmer to begin to understand programming. And Game Maker Studio is an excellent program if you're a solo developer. It's an excellent program if you're two people making a game. Let's say you want to make something like Vampire Survivor or something like Undertale. Like it's excellent for making simple 2D games. There are many simple 2D games that are focused on gameplay, not necessarily art, that are exceptional. Other, quick negatives about Game Maker Studio is that, you can't use any 3D. It does support some 3D, but it's super advanced stuff, not nearly as simple as just rendering an OBJ model and then importing that into the engine like you can do with Unreal. Like basically, if you look at, something that you see on itch.io and you're like, oh yeah, I want to make a game like that, like a, 2D Pokemon clone or something, or you want to make something like Celeste, or you want to make something like Hyper Light Drifter, like I think that was made with Game Maker Studio. Like those kind of games are I would never say it's easy, but it's certainly more accessible. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more focused about Unreal Engine. Now, firstly, we were in a situation where we already had a publishing deal, and I was looking to hire and expand the team up to about 5 to 7 people. And in order to do that, I thought, well, if I'm making a Game Maker Studio game, it's going to be really difficult to hire people, primarily because version control is really difficult with Game Maker Studio, very easy with Unreal Engine, and also more people know Unreal Engine or studying it. They see more of a future in it for more serious AAA game dev if they should choose to go that route, and there's more you can do with it. As a game developer, you just get taken a little bit more seriously as an Unreal Engine developer, and you have more job opportunities for understanding and knowing how to use it. Unreal Engine is happening all over the industry. And a lot more serious professional level game developers are going to be learning it, right? So there's a lot more resources. So you can find tutorials more easily on how to do everything that you would need to do with Unreal Engine. So we started out with using some marketplace kit stuff and dissecting that and understanding how it worked. Within a matter of 2 weeks, we had a little demo prototype. I made a video presenting that to the publisher, explaining how it would save us tons of time. Some of that is what you've been watching throughout this video. Furthermore, I've always envisioned this game as being more of a 2.5D game. I've always wanted to include more and more hand-painted 3D into this 2.5D game, but keeping the craftsmanship and feel of a really hand-drawn animated animation. So placing sprites into a 3D space within Unreal Engine is not just easy, it's fun and enjoyable. And my life is 10 times more enjoyable after having switched to Unreal Engine because I'm able to just drag in, as I mentioned, like drag in lights where I want, drag objects around in the scene, add colliders to sprites, and add particles and visual effects into the scene, such as like snow is literally as simple as dropping in a snow particle emitter and then modifying it a little bit based on the camera depth. Something as simple as atmosphere or weather effects or lighting, these things are very simple in Unreal Engine, and we found that making a 2.5D game, Unreal Engine isn't really made for that, but it's still way easier to do than in Game Maker Studio. Instead of like hand coding the camera speed of every sprite so that it creates the illusion of parallax and depth, I literally can just place a sprite into the background of a 3D space and it is acting in accordance with the distance from the camera. I mean, it is awesome for a 2D art in a 3D space. It just feels so good. Another pro of Unreal Engine is that it has a visual scripting language similar to GML, but even easier to use than Game Maker Studio's visual scripting language. It has blueprints that allow a non-programmer to do simple things like trigger this animation flipbook to run when the player enters this collision box, for example. So we've ended up, building a lot of tools so that the programmers don't have to do custom programming for every scenario and instance and event. A lot of times myself or Anthony, the design lead on the project, we can do a lot of events ourselves without having to actually code anything, which is beautiful. I realize I've gone quite a while in this video without really giving any negatives or cons about Unreal Engine, and quite frankly, there aren't many. There's next to none. In fact, the only real issues I run into are that I work on a Mac and the rest of my team works in Windows. And so sometimes we'll have like plugin conflicts or something like that. But, I have a programmer on the team that tends to solve those issues for us. And I ran into an issue with Game Maker Studio where they were constantly updating the engine and moving things around still. So when it came to switching to Unreal Engine, we decided, well, let's just stick with Unreal Engine 4. It's stable. They're not making any changes to Unreal Engine 4. So we know exactly what it can do. And on top of that, we're developing for a system that's 9 years old, you know, the Nintendo Switch. So that's about when the Unreal Engine 4 was at its prime. So we're using the right engine for the right project, for the right era of hardware. At this point, like, you know, we're pretty locked into working with Unreal Engine, and I haven't had a single day where I look back and think, wow, you know, I really missed that. So I realize a lot of my audience here on YouTube are artists, you know, and I know maybe some of this stuff probably doesn't even interest you. I appreciate you, if you stuck it out this far in the video, I appreciate you, you know, giving a listen to some of the more finer points of just, you know, the overall game development process. If this is of interest to you, please do let me know. Sound off in the comments below. And I will be covering a lot more in-depth game development vlogs here on my YouTube channel. So don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, ciao.